Ben Cutler here, one of our solution specialists with WinPure, and today is part 6 of our how-to video series, how to master data with the WinPure's Clean and Match Master Data Management Solution. Part 6 is how to integrate data from multiple disparate sources or disparate systems. So we're going to go ahead and start looking at some of the data within the system. We've queued up a scenario here for this demonstration. Again, we're going to try to keep this very brief, down to 10 or 15 minutes. So we're going to start by looking at the input from each system and the desired output from this process here. So again, part of mastering data is integrating data from multiple disparate systems, disparate sources of data. And again, very important to understand that the content and the structure of the data is likely to vary from system to system. And though, this could be minor differences in content and structure. These could be very significant differences in content and structure. But when processing data this way, it is very important to have a solid view of the input and a solid vision of your desired output. So that's where we're going to start this presentation today. If you look at my screen here, you can see we're on data lists. And if you look down below, again, we're looking at all of the data that's been imported into the system here or has been processed throughout through the system here. We're looking at the data first by user, and then we have a few different segmented views of data. So here we're looking at all data lists within the system. But again, we can also look very specifically at imported data or data that's been cleaned or data that has been output from a match process that way. So let's go back to all, and let's start with the input. So the business scenario here is that we're extracting data from 3 disparate business systems. That is going to be a source of record, a master source of data. That is going to be data coming from an ERP system, and that is going to be data coming maybe from a website or e-commerce or something along those lines, some sort of transactional, purchase history type of record of the transaction as well. So what we're looking at is customer data in these 3 sources of data here. And again, the content and the structure of the data will be slightly or significantly different from source to source. So let's go ahead and take a look at the data from each system that way. If we start with the data from the master source, again, up top, we can see this comes from the master source. And if we just take a quick look at some of the different field headers or column headers that we see in this data set and the content itself, we can see that, very consistently, the data, looks pretty clean, looks to be normalized, standardized. Most of the fields have been populated. So this looks pretty similar to what I would expect from, coming from a master source of data. A few things to note about the data coming from each source in this story is that you'll see we have 3 fields here for IDs. So we have a transaction ID. That one actually comes from the new purchases source. We have an ERP ID, and that comes from the ERP source. And we have a customer ID, and that comes from the master source. The IDs are not the same from source to source. In this scenario, we have a master ID, but we haven't done anything. We haven't done enough with the data to essentially populate that customer ID, that master record ID into these other systems, nor have we populated the transaction ID or the ERP ID back into our master data source here. And that's going to be part of the exercise. That's something we're going to do throughout the processing that way. And keep in mind, when mastering data and allowing systems to kind of communicate disparate business systems, disparate data sets, disparate databases, that's often and almost always done with some sort of ID, right? So the scenario here is a very common one where we're kind of extracting data from multiple disparate systems. Each has a unique ID within those systems, but they don't share the same IDs. And the name, the address, some of these customer details, and really the structure of the data set is going to be slightly or significantly different from source to source. So again, we will not find this customer ID in the other sources of data, and but in the ERP source, we will find the ERP ID, and the new purchases source, we will find the transaction ID. If you look over here, you're going to see the master source does not contain a billing frequency. That's one of the things that we're going to update throughout this process. If we take a look at the name, we can see that we have data describing Ann Jones and Becky Smith. And we have some information here on address. Looks like a full address, a complete address in the address column. We've got lat long, kind of a building number, a premise number, street name and a street suffix in its column. Looks like a city in the locality column. We've got a state abbreviation in the admin area column. And looks like a country abbreviation, a company name, and a parent company name. So all looks good. Let's go ahead and compare this now. And very specifically, let's compare the name, Ann Jones and Becky Smith, to some of the other sources of data. Let's go ahead and take a look at the ERP. So again, we're looking for Ann Jones and Becky Smith. Here, if you take a look again, we've got an ERP ID. We don't have a customer ID. The ERP ID is not going to match the customer ID. We've got a different structure to the customer name. Here we've got a last name, Jones and Smith. And if we follow this over, we've got a first name, Annie and Rebecca, which is very common. If you notice here, the first names do not match, and the structure does not match from system to system here. So thus far, we have a mismatch on the structure of the names, and we have mismatching names. We have Annie, let's take a look at the Annie Jones and Rebecca Smith, right? And in the other system, we have Ann Jones and Becky Smith all in a single column, right? And again, this is very, very common from, looking at data from, disparate sources. So these are things that we need to take into consideration. You can also notice here that in the admin area, the state name California is the complete state name. So it's California, it's not abbreviated. And then again, the data in that master source represents the state name abbreviated, uses the abbreviated form of that state name. So again, these are all things that we want to take into consideration when mastering data, right? We're consolidating, we're mastering data from multiple disparate sources that will have minor or significant differences in both the content and the structure. And a lot of this we're going to do at the clean step, and some of it we're going to do at the merge and survivorship step. So let's go ahead and look at the third set of data here, which is new purchases. And so again, in new purchases, we'll find a transaction ID, but we will not find the ERP ID. We will not find the customer ID. So we cannot kind of sync, currently sync this information using the ID. We cannot update the information using the ID. If you look over here, we've got a name column. So in this case, we do have kind of a complete name field here, but we're not actually seeing a complete name. In this case, we're seeing A.Jones and R.Smith. If we look a little bit deeper here, if we look at the address data here, we've got maybe some issues with casing, probably some missing information. It looks like maybe a missing space here as well. Missing city, postal code, state. Right? This is kind of a pretty blank set of data. What we do have here is a transaction ID. We have a name, we have an address. We have enough information to match and link these customer records from system to system. That much we do have. And the rest of the work here is going to be done from merge and survivorship. So now that we've taken a look at the input from each source here, let's go ahead and take a look at our vision for the potential output here, which would be like a single customer view, which would be, essentially, preserving duplicates, so to speak, and updating the IDs across duplicate records and sending the records back to their source systems to update the source systems with the new information collected from matching records or duplicates from these other systems, right? So let's go ahead and open that up here, and let's start by looking at the group ID. Again, when the group ID is duplicated, that means we're looking at duplicates. So we have two groups of duplicates, two groups of matching records here. We have group 1 and we have group 2. 3 records contained in each of these groups. If we follow this over to the right here, we can see where the data came from. So we insert the source name, that helps with data lineage. And if you follow us over a little farther to the right here, the vision for the single customer view, this final mastered set of data, if you look across these duplicates, we've got 3 records here with a standardized name, Rebecca Smith, 3 records down below with a standardized name, now Annie Jones. And if you look at the IDs, we've done the updating here. So we've taken data. Let me just go ahead and do a quick display thing here. If we look at this by the source name, new purchases had a transaction ID. It now also, it contains the ERP ID and the customer ID. The ERP or the data, the customer record that came from the ERP system, that contained the ERP ID. It did not contain the transaction ID or the customer ID. So hopefully you're kind of following along in terms of the types of cleansing, normalization, standardization, and transformation that's taken place to both the content and the structure of these data sets. And again, that's happened through some of the routines that we've processed through cleansing the data. This has also happened through matching and through a merge and survivorship strategy. So now when you take a look at these records, this looks very clean, very consistent, common data describing customers from source to source here with the right IDs to provide the technological handshake for communication to take place from system to system, interoperability of data, so to speak. And you can see we now have more data from each system here to go back and enrich those systems. So that is a quick look at the input and the desired output. Now let's take a quick look here, moving step by step, fairly quickly, using saved settings within the WinPure Clean and Match Master Data Management System to repeat that process to produce that final output here. So we're just going to go ahead and start with the data, the input that we have in the system here. And the next step is going to be clean. And what we're going to do is we're going to do some cleansing, some standardization, some normalization, some transformation to the data that came specifically from the ERP set of data. So in the upper right here, we're going to start by choosing the data that came from the ERP set. That's this one here. And again, we're going to work with save settings here to process a series of transformations to the content and the structure of this data set here. Now, in this specific scenario, because I'm running a merge operation multiple times, and because I want you to actually see the changes that are taking place as I process these changes, I've actually set this up in multiple steps. So we're going to go ahead and process that now. So we've chosen our set of data. If we use the preview data option down below, we can just quickly preview this set of data and some of the changes that are going to take place here. So what I'm going to do with these transformations is I'm going to take the data from the last name column and from the first name column, and I'm going to merge and assign an order of the way that the data get merged so that we get a consistent complete name column or a full name column that is more consistent with the data coming from the other data sources. Beyond that, I'm going to apply some rules here to standardize the complete state name to an abbreviated state name. So this is going to transform from California to CA. And beyond that, if you look here, we don't have kind of a complete address. What we do have are address parts, like a building number, a premise number, a street name, and a suffix. We do have a city name. We do have that state name, and we do have the country here. So I'm going to process a total of 3 or 4 changes here, or several different changes in 3 or 4 steps, and we're going to see some of these changes as they take place. So I'm going to do that again using our clean matrix. This is a saved group of settings that just saves us some time, so we're not kind of doing this manually and setting this up. So again, I'm going to use the load matrix, and I'm going to start with ERP step 0. That loads the change. That's a word manager change. If we go down, we can see this one's in red because there is a rule applied there. If we open this up, we can actually see the rule. So this first change is going to change or standardize the complete state name from California to the abbreviation CA. Let's go ahead and check OK. Let's use the preview data. Let's come over here and we can see the transformation that's going to take place here. Let's go ahead and run that and do OK. And let's do ERP 0, run clean. Now we do need to refresh the screen if we want to go ahead and work with the new data set, which we do. So I'm going to come back to data lists. I can see the new set of data is ready for us here. The changes have been processed, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out. I'm going to come back to clean. Again, I just needed to refresh the screen. Let's go ahead and choose ERP 0. That's the new data set. If we preview data, we can see the changes taking place, right? We can see we standardized that state name, that state abbreviation. So now, again, I'm going to make this a little bit larger. We're working with ERP 0. I'm going to load matrix. This time, we're going to use ERP step 1. We're going to preview the change. So again, we have these names split out into first name and last name. So this first change here is going to be a merge operation where I'm creating a new column for full name. You can see that here. Go ahead and close. Let's run clean. Click OK. This one is going to be ERP 1. Run clean. Again, the job is processing in the background. We do need to refresh that page. We can see the data is done. Come back to clean. Choose that now as a source. Remove this from our screen. Preview data. And again, we've got that name column. Let's go ahead and again, this is a multiple pass here. And part of the reason why is I'm using kind of the same functionality multiple times. But another reason why here is I want you to actually kind of see these granular changes as they're taking place. Let's go ahead and choose load matrix 1. This is step 2. Let's preview data. In step 2, what we're doing here is we are merging this address information. So if we move over to the right here, you can see merge result. That's the first merge. Merge result 1. That's the second merge. And what we have there is a more complete version of the address. So again, we're transforming the content and the structure. Here's an example of content transformation. Here's an example of structure transformation. Let's go ahead and close out of that. Let's run clean. This is ERP1. So we're going to say ERP1, if I'm not mistaken. Run clean. That looks good to me. Oh, it actually turned out to be 1.1. That's fine. Let's come back here. This last one here, this is going to be the third pass. So we're going to choose that data set. Again, preview data. We've got that new address here, that more complete address. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take this one and we're going to merge it with this one, with the premise, the building number there. So again, I am going to load matrix, step 3, preview data. And if you take a look here, we now have kind of the final version or semi-final version of that address. This is going to be the column that we're going to use to map to the address columns in the other data sets. This is also going to be the column that we're going to use to do the matching on address. So I needed to make sure that the content and the structure, at least for matching purposes, was about the same. And that's what we've done here. So this is the change that we're going to run now. So again, we're going to do this, and we're just going to call it ERP. This is actually, I'm going to say 3.1, run clean. The job is processing in the background. Now again, if you just take a look back here and take a look at the input from the master and the new purchases, this is now starting to hopefully make sense where we're going to be able to take a full address from this side, which is the master data, and we're going to be able to take a more complete address from this side, which is new purchases, and we're going to be able to match that information, not to this here, because that wouldn't work. We're going to be able to match that information to this here, right? To a more to something that's more common, both in structure and in content, right? So we just process a series of changes there to make the content and the structure more consistent from source to source. Let's go ahead and cancel out of that. Now let's go and do the matching. So for the matching, again, this is simple 4 steps here. We're going to use a saved configuration so that we can skip through this faster. So we're going to use the existing configuration. We're going to choose that down below. That's part 6, data integration, single customer view. That's going to load the sources of data. We're going to go ahead and click next. In step 2, we're mapping columns from source to source here. That allows us to set the final data or column schema. That also allows us to do the matching, right? So here's the source name, here's the source name, here's the source name, and then below the source name of the columns from those data sources. And you can see how this column from this source is mapped to this column from this source, and so on and so forth, with transaction ID and ERP ID, and so on and so forth. So you can see how that's working here. Make a few changes. You can see I've left a few of these fields unmapped, and that's just because I don't need them in the final output. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove them now. Let's go ahead and click next. Step 3 is where we're setting up the match definition. In this case, we're going to keep it very simple. We're essentially running an 85% fuzzy match on the address column, right? Click next here. Step 4, again, we have a configuration name. We have the output name, and I'm going to give this the output name of 1.1, and I can update the configuration and I can start matching. In this case, I'm just going to start matching. That's going to get us our new set of results. We can move back to data lists. We can see that that post-match output. So this is not our final output. The final output is going to come from merge and survivorship, but this gets us that much closer. So here, if we start with the group ID, we can see kind of color-coded in white. These 3 are all group ID 1. That's a group of duplicates. When the group ID is duplicated, that represents a group of duplicates. So we have 2 groups of duplicates, kind of in white and in blue, group 1 and group 2. And if you follow this over, you can see how this data kind of looks from system to system this way. We bring the source name over here. Yeah, that's actually perfect. You can see the transaction ID comes from new purchases. Same thing down below, right? This is a group of duplicates. This is a group of duplicates. Transaction ID comes from new purchases. ERP ID comes from ERP, and the customer ID comes from the master source. Now, what we're going to do here within this group of duplicates is we're going to update to fill in the blanks here and here, here and here, here and here. We're going to fill in the billing frequency here and here. We're going to standardize the name so that it is Rebecca Smith in all 3 systems. And we're also going to standardize the address to use the address specifically from the, I believe it's this one, from the ERP system. Yeah, we're going to keep this address and this name. We're going to keep this name and this address. And we're just going to overwrite the other matching addresses there. And again, we're going to fill in some of the other blanks to enrich these customer records in the other systems. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that through merge and survivorship. Let's take a look. Let's come down to merge and survivorship. Start by choosing the match results. By default, it's going to start with the most recent set of match results. And to do this, we're going to set a master record, and we're going to use saved settings, right? To just kind of speed up the process a little bit here. So what we're going to do, again, we're seeing the same view of data here, where we've got 2 groups of matches, one group in blue, one group in white. We can see the source name and the group IDs here. And we're going to start by setting a master record, and we're going to set the master record based on source. We're going to tell it to prioritize the ERP source. Let's execute that change. The system is going to do its processing. We're going to be presented with that new view of data, and the master record here has been chosen from group to group, prioritizing the ERP source of data, right? So we just did that programmatically, setting up a priority at the source level. We can also do that programmatically, setting up sources at the column level, and even looking at specific values within specific columns or fields. This next part here is where we're going to do all of the updating and the enrichment of all of this information. And we're going to do that with the update and overwrite function. And we're going to do that with a template that we saved here. So the template is part 6, single customer view, update and overwrite. That's going to go ahead and fill in the settings for us here. And I'll just point out a few. So again, name and address fields are going to be overwritten, right? Not just updated, but overwritten. And the data that is going to be survived is going to come from the master record, which is the ERP source. So in other words, we're taking the name and the address from the ERP source and we're overwriting the other names and addresses from the other sources to make the information more consistent across sources. Now, if we scroll down below, we're also overwriting the company name to keep a very common, a very standardized company name, and we're doing that based on the most popular value. So not from a specific source, we're doing that based on the most popular value. So we're going to run the update here, and our job is just about done. The system is doing its processing here. Then we can go ahead and review the results, and we can export the data. If we scroll over here, you're going to now see that single customer view, where we've taken customer data from multiple disparate sources. We have done some cleansing and standardizing and normalizing and transformation of the content and the structure, both using pre-matched like cleansing settings and standardization settings. We've done the mapping, we've done the fuzzy matching, the error tolerant matching of records, setting up match definitions across different sources, and we've done some updating and overwriting and making the data more consistent, setting up kind of a merge and survivorship strategy to make the data more consistent from which those customer records came from. And so here again, if we were to move this source name a little over closer to the IDs, you can see that each record coming from each source now contains all 3 IDs. So we can then send this data back to those source systems and update and enrich those source systems. And doing that allows for the handshake and communication from system to system. This is, again, how we master data. Integrating data from multiple disparate systems is a big part of what we do. Cleansing, standardizing, normalizing data, better understanding the content and the structure, making the content and structure more consistent from source to source, doing field mapping from source to source, doing the error tolerant matching, fuzzy matching from source to source, and setting up a merge and survivorship strategy. That is exactly how we integrate data from multiple disparate sources and produce a final set of master data at the output here. So then from there, we can go ahead and we can export, and the job is done. So again, my name is Ben Cutler, and this is part 6, how to integrate data from multiple disparate sources. My name is Ben Cutler. I'm one of our solution specialists. Please visit us at winpure.com for more information, or you can email sales@winpure.com for more information. So thank you again for your time, and please stay tuned. Have a great day.